Hello, I'm Steve Clemons. I direct the American Strategy Program at the New America Foundation. I've been asked to offer a few comments on President Bush's State of the Union address last night. I've been a student of these State of the Union addresses in all the years that the President has offered them, and I think last night, unfortunately, was the least memorable. It was the least memorable in part because it was the least stridently partisan. President Bush very clearly reached across the aisle on issues like climate change, on education, on supporting the military, and I think that that took some of the pizzazz out of the speech. Nonetheless, it had its moments. To some degree, the President reinforced two of the key features that he wants historians to remember about his administration, that being tax cuts and faith-based initiatives, two items that he gave a lot of attention to. As you move into foreign policy, though, I think that the speech became more contentious and interesting. On Iran, he clearly dialed down his rhetoric a little bit, kept open the prospect of negotiating with the Iranians if they suspend enrichment, talked about, I think, respecting the history, the legacy of Iran and the Iranian people, and really reached out to them, and I think that was really positive. He did feature Israel-Palestine efforts that he's engaged in now and identified these as one of the key issues. He referred to Mahmoud Abbas of Palestine and Olmert by name, Olmert of Israel, of course, the prime minister there. He referred to the region as the Holy Land, which may work for evangelicals and not for Muslim Arabs, but nonetheless, I think that the President putting this as a key feature of his foreign policy direction is important. What's a sort of interesting sidebar is that yesterday afternoon I received from the White House a set of highlights of the speech, and they failed to include Israel-Palestine in the highlights of the President's speech, and so there may be some disorganization as to what the President's real priorities are, but nonetheless, the President did say those words. Darfur and genocide were mentioned last night. The President talked about the problems in Sudan, his concerns about genocide and the loss of life in Africa. And I think that was important. What was odd was to see Nancy Pelosi quickly jump up and applaud the President for that statement, and Vice President Cheney to look cautiously around the room at whether he should stand up at that point or not for his own President on the subject of Darfur. On Iraq, I think that it is very interesting to see how the President has so successfully seduced a democratically controlled Congress into a discussion of tactics rather than a discussion of strategy. In his comments about Iraq, he again reinforced the notion that America was winning, that the surge was working, that terrorists were on the run. But I think if you were to step back and ask what were the key political objectives of the United States in Iraq, basically doing deals with local mafioso, warlords and to some degree thugs on both the Sunni and Shia side is not what we sent American men and women to do deployed over in Iraq. But nonetheless, he's identifying as a victory. Both sides of the aisle stood up applauding the President for that activity. I find it one of President Bush's successes that people like myself in civil society should be critiquing. We're not achieving our objectives there, but it is interesting to see how he was given a pass on that issue by Democrats and Republicans alike. One of the really interesting sidebars to last night, outside the President's speech and his engagement with the Congress, was a moment before his speech began when Hillary Clinton, of course the President of the United States, walked into the chamber, saw Ted Kennedy sitting next to Barack Obama, and walked over and began shaking hands with the senators around Kennedy, Obama, and with Senator Kennedy himself, who was quite gracious and took her hand. And Barack Obama turned away and did not take Hillary Clinton's hand. So I think that this will be remembered, if for nothing else, for the State of the Union where Clinton and Obama did not touch. If I were advising the President of the United States today and really looking at the fact that our national security position, in my view, is not in good shape and needs to be turned around, and just removing all partisan bias, what I would hope from our President is the fact that we would get a square assessment of the fact that the United States needs to begin turning our problems around in the world, needs to begin looking not only at the Middle East and our distractions from Iraq, but find a credible way to tell the world again that we're going to be there and influential in many of the key issues, whether it's on poverty, whether it's transnational disease issues, whether it is climate change, but then looking at some of the real regional instabilities that exist in the world. South Asia, what's going on in Pakistan and Afghanistan today are important. Israel and Palestine is a fundamental building block on any successful strategy in the Middle East. And while he mentioned Israel-Palestine, the President failed to talk about how it interlinks with so many of the other issues that we're contending with in the region, both in terms of how to balance our relations with Iran, where Saudi Arabia fits in. How do we basically get countries like Syria and Cuba, which we know significant portions of their population want to have a new and more constructive relationship with the United States? Why aren't we offering that, or at least trying to find some track that we can get onto, and to begin to try to build a cycle of positive events, incremental positive events that reinforce one another? That kind of approach gets us away from thinking about silver bullet strategies, that if you just solved one problem, you solve all problems. And it gets us away from dealing with our global problems, whether it's with Venezuela or Iran or Afghanistan or Pakistan today, as problems unto themselves, almost in a bubble, isolated from other issues. Today we have a problem where the United States, rightly or wrongly, showed very fundamental limits in Iraq. And by showing limits, we've basically thrown off the global equilibrium. We've made our allies wonder whether we would be with them in key challenges. We've emboldened our foes to basically rush their agendas forward in a time of our perceived weakness. And to basically get back into a positive position, we need to begin identifying areas where we can succeed. I think Cuba and opening up family travel and travel for Americans is one of these that would tell the world that we're basically moving in a different direction. I think really delivering on Israel-Palestine would be a fundamental success, but you can't do that without engaging Syria and frankly other parts of that equation on the Islamist side. So to basically move forward in a credible and constructive and realistic way would basically build confidence around the world and at home in our leadership. And that is something I didn't hear from President Bush last night, which was unfortunate. Thanks very much for joining us.